it's Jess. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. If you've seen the thumbnail and the title, you know that in today's video I'm going to be reading The Hunger Games for the first time. Sort of. And what I mean by the sort of is I will be reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and The Sunrise on the Reaping for the first time in this reading vlog. I have read the original Hunger Game trilogies multiple times, and as a matter of fact, just a few months ago I actually did finish up reading Mockingjay again. Full disclosure, I actually completely forgot to film an introduction for this video, which kind of has been a habit of mine for vlogs lately, and I need to fix that. I already know how this vlog is gonna go. I'm just gonna apologize now about how long it is because I could not stop yapping. So this is going to be a long one. You should get a drink and a snack because you're gonna need it. If you don't know, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is one of the Hunger Games prequels. That is the one that I will be starting with. That story is President Snow's backstory, and then the other book I'll be reading, Sunrise on the Reaping, is Haymitch's games. Just a fair warning for anyone watching this video, while I will not be going in depth into any of the plot lines within the original Hunger Games, I do just want to say that I am assuming if you're watching this video that you have read the entire original Hunger Games trilogy, or like at least watched the movies. There are going to be some mild spoilers for the original trilogy in this video, so if you plan on reading the Hunger Games and you do not want to know anything, I will see you in my next video. This was not the one for you. Go read that and come back if you want to. I did also just want to mention that while I will be keeping the Sunrise on the Reaping section entirely spoiler free, other than the information that we already know from the original Hunger Games trilogy, because obviously we know some things from there, I would say that there is like a couple of extremely mild spoilers within the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes section of this vlog. It's not anything that is like big plot points, and I do try to speak vaguely when I can, but when I was discussing A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I just realized that there's no way for me to talk about the book in a way that I think the book deserves and in a way that I want to talk about the book, which is a lot about what the book has to say, like thematically. I just couldn't talk about it without revealing a couple of things that are gonna happen. In my opinion, the spoilers in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes section is extremely mild. I don't think that it is anything that would actually ruin your enjoyment of the book if you have not read it yet. I did just want to put a disclaimer at the beginning of the vlog so that you are aware that there will be some mild spoilers for the original trilogy, and also a couple of mild spoilers for A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. There's your disclaimer. I already know how this vlog is gonna go, so let's throw it back to past Jessica, and I hope you enjoy the fact that I cannot shut up about these two books, and I hope you enjoy my thoughts. Yesterday I finished part 1 of A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and so far I am enjoying it. Suzanne Collins is a phenomenal author. Oh, also as a general disclaimer, the shelves are not finished. Honestly, don't look at the shelves. Mind your own business on that. They are a massive work in progress, okay? In A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, this is President Snow's backstory. It's meant to give like a lot of insight into why he is the way that he is in the original Hunger Games trilogy. At the kickoff of this book, I believe President Snow is like around 17 or 18. I'm basing this purely off of the fact that he is in his last year of school and he's trying to get into like a university type setting, and usually within the United States, your last year of school, you're 17 or 18. So I'm just guessing. If they said his age, to be honest, I don't remember, but he's around there. And this year is the 10th annual Hunger Games, and they are changing things up. I do find a lot of this new information really interesting. So in like the main Hunger Games series, the capital is everything. You know, it has every single luxury man could possibly want. All the food, all the gadgets, like just like luxury apartments, luxury products, luxury clothing. It has everything you want. But when we join Snow in this year, we see a lot of the rebuilding and the results of what in the original Hunger Games is known as the Dark Days, which was like, I don't know if it was the only uprising before Katniss's rebellion, but the Dark Days was another rebellion and it failed, and that is what kicked off the Hunger Games in the original series. The capital is still in quite a bit of disarray. Snow comments that like there are still some streets that you can't drive down because of debris on them. His entire family is living in poverty. They're living in this like really luxurious apartment that was his family's, and I suppose Snow has inherited it. He's living with his grandmam, which is his grandmother, and his cousin Tigress, which is interesting because we meet Tigress in the first Hunger Games. And so far, I really like Tigress as a character. But it is just interesting to see that even 10 years later, they are still rebuilding. Snow is living in poverty. Snow is currently in school. Tigress is working as like an internship with a fashion designer, and then their grandmother doesn't work at all. She just stays in the apartment. So the two of them are trying to kind of trick everyone to think that they're still rich, when in reality, a lot of times they don't even have enough food to get through the day. What I also find interesting is they have decided for the first time to change up the way that they do the games, mainly because people don't want to watch them. And I love that. I love the fact that people don't enjoy the Hunger Games at this point in the series. It does make me sad because we know that by the time we get to Katniss's story in the timeline that the Hunger Games are a spectacle and everybody in the capital loves them. I mean, obviously not like everybody, but the vast majority of the capital population love the Hunger Games. They get really invested, they bet on the outcomes, and it is true entertainment. But when we're only in the 10th year, it is still just a really depressing show of kids murdering kids. And because the war was only 10 years ago, and because they're still rebuilding and recovering from that, the Hunger Games does not have the monetary investment to actually make it entertainment. It is literally them just throwing 24 kids into an arena, which used to be like a sporting arena, and they just throw weapons in there and they're like, kill each other. And the people in the districts obviously hate this, like the people in districts always hate it, but at this point in history, the capital citizens also don't like it. They're like, I don't want to watch kids murdering each other. So one of Snow's teachers, Dr. Gaul, is like the head game maker in charge of everything, and she's also a scientist working in a lab. She is ultra creepy, like so creepy. She likes the Hunger Games. She likes the reminder and the punishment that they are for the districts, and she has a ton of political power. So this year, for the first time, the tributes are being assigned mentors, and the mentors are kids from Snow's class, and Snow is one of the kids that is selected to be a mentor. Being selected is quite prestigious, and Snow is basically hoping that if he does a good enough job mentoring his tribute to the Hunger Games, that it will help him secure a scholarship for the university, because Snow can't afford to go to university unless he pretty much has like an entire full ride scholarship. And Snow is assigned the girl tribute from District 12, and in this book that is Lucy Gray Baird, and she is a really interesting character from what I have gathered so far. Now the thing is, we're only in Snow's POV. You really don't get to hear her thoughts. A lot of her character development is reading between the lines and trying to figure out like what of Snow's internal monologue is true and what is his cognitive dissonance. Because let me tell you, the cognitive dissonance goes so hard in this book. It is so wild to read. Snow sucks, by the way. Snow is a despicable human. He is terrible. Being in his head is horrendous, the things that he thinks. I genuinely don't understand that there are people that read this book and thought that Suzanne Collins was trying to like romanticize Snow, because it's like very obvious from chapter 1 that he is a bad person. And like also what I find interesting too about Lucy Gray, like other than the fact that she is a very compelling character because we as the reader are constantly intrigued because we're trying to like figure out the puzzle of who she is as a person. But it's also very interesting because she's part of this group of people called the Covey, and they were traveling musicians before the Dark Days. I'm assuming that there was probably like a wide extended network of the Covey people and that there were probably different traveling groups of them. So I would imagine that not every single Covey person is now in District 12, but basically once there was like this authoritarian crackdown on the districts and they stopped allowing travel between the districts as a means of control, the Covey people, at least like the group that Lucy Gray's family is a part of, they were like assimilated into District 12. And I find it really interesting because there are hints of music within the original Hunger Games that is like sprinkled into the District 12 culture, but I do find it very interesting that the Covey people as like a community get no mention as far as I can remember in the original Hunger Games. Snow is meeting this character who is a part of this community, and now that community seems to no longer exist. I also want to talk about the fact that like Snow is kind of mediocre. From what I have gathered, Snow does seem to be quite charming. He seems like he is a charismatic person. So, I mean, he's got that going for him. And he is in school and he is, by all accounts, at the top of his class. I don't really think he is like a genius by any means. I don't even think he's close to a genius, but I do think he is intelligent enough to capitalize on situations around him using his charisma. And I also think he is intelligent enough to succeed in school and be at the top of his class. But other than that, like Snow is kind of like a mediocre dude. To be perfectly honest, he doesn't really have any ideas of his own. Like, it's actually so funny to me being in his head. He'll be like going to class and creepy Dr. Gao will be like, how can we convince people that actually they do want to watch children murder other children? How can we make this fun? Snow appears to contribute a lot of ideas, but in actuality, it's just that he hears his classmates and he hears other people making jokes, and Snow is kind of amoral, and so he's like, yeah, let's do that. Like, let's let people bet on the tributes. Like, let's let them influence the games, and then they'll care about what the outcome is because they're personally invested. They'll lose money. And like what his classmates were saying as like, this would be a bad idea, but like as a joke, Snow's like, yep, I don't have a good moral compass, so yeah, let's do it. It's also funny because he's had these interactions with Lucy where she has saved his ass multiple times. She is literally a captive that's about to be in a murder tournament. Why is she having to save your ass? There are several times where Snow freezes up and he pretty much comes out of the situations looking glowing and everybody thinking he's this like upstanding amazing guy because of promptings or because of the actions of Lucy Gray. Like I said, the cognitive dissonance goes hard. The way he talks about people from the districts, he has a friend, a classmate, I say like friend with, you know, air quotes. His name is Sejanus, and Sejanus, basically his father was like profiting off of the war, and he made enough money that he was able to move his family from district to the capital. And Sejanus is fully convinced that Snow is his friend because of the actions that Snow takes. Like, from an outward point of view, you'd be like, okay, yeah, if a person does this, this, and this, they must be my friend. But when you hear Snow reflect on these interactions and you hear the running monologue that he has, Snow like hates Sejanus. And he's like, he's just a rich kid coming in from the districts and he doesn't understand how cultured the capital is. And he is so elitist. It is absolutely bonkers. And Sejanus is another character that helps make Snow look good to like his classmates and the general population. And it's really funny because Lucy Gray makes Snow look good to, again, his classmates and his teachers and the general population because they are televising like this mentoring process because it's new. So Lucy Gray makes him look good, but she also makes him look good to Sejanus, and then Sejanus comes up with ideas of his own, and because Snow gets involved in those ideas, Sejanus ends up making Snow look good to Lucy Gray. So he's just got everyone fooled. But his inner monologue is truly, truly horrendous and vile. Like, Snow actually enjoys other people's misery. And like, it's one thing to not care if other people are miserable, but like, it's another thing to get like vindictive pleasure out of other people's misery. Another thing I learned too is that this is the first time they're feeding the tributes. The 10th year is the first time they feed them. I mean, I know it's called the Hunger Games, and even in like Katniss's, like in the arena, a lot of it is about survival and people do starve to death every year, but it is so wild to me that like the Hunger Games are meant to be punishment, and the goal is that like the capital wants these 24 kids to murder each other. Once they reap them from the districts and they bring them into the capital, first of all, they put them in the zoo, and like people from the capital come and like stare at them, but they put them in the zoo and then they don't feed them. And they're there for like several days. So they're going into the arena after like starving for 3 or 4 days. Of course, this is not entertaining. None of them have any energy. Like, how are they supposed to kill each other if they can't even sit up straight? Like, what do you mean you don't even feed them? They literally treat them worse than animals. And according to Snow, they are worse than animals. And I think it's also really telling of how little empathy Snow has in the fact that like he is living in poverty. Yes, he does have his nice apartment, but like they have almost no furniture in there. He doesn't eat 3 meals every single day. He is not living a great life, and I think it's really telling that he is now experiencing like a quarter of what some of the people living in the districts before this uprising happened. Like, the uprising happened for a reason, and like people are literally starving every single day in the districts. In a normal person, experiencing stuff like this would help build empathy. In Snow's instance, he's just like, oh, I don't deserve this. I deserve to eat whatever I want every single day, and I deserve to live in luxury, and it's the district's fault that I'm not. It's wild to see the hoops that he jumps through in his mind to justify his own terrible thoughts. I also did want to talk too that I am enjoying some of the discussions that are happening between Snow and his teachers and the rest of his classmates. They have debates going back and forth, and like, it's pretty evident that not all of his classmates are on board with the same line of thinking he is. In fact, it does seem that like the majority of his classmates are against the Hunger Games. It does seem that like they do think the capital is right and the capital should be in charge, and they think that like the consequences of the war, of like what happened like right after the war, were justified. That a lot of his classmates kind of have this point of view, which like makes sense. But basically that like it's been 10 years and now they're punishing literal children who were like the same age as these kids in the class. Why are we punishing kids that like obviously they wouldn't have any control of the situation either? And I am just really enjoying the discussions that they have in class. I find it really fun that they talk about, you know, how their society is built and what type of government there should be and how much control the government should have over the districts and stuff like that. I'm really, really hoping that as we move into part 2, we'll get a lot more of that. But I do think that probably the majority of the focus for part 2 is going to be on the games. So those are my thoughts on A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes part 1. If you don't care about my life at all, you can scan forward in the video to when I am finished filming this particular clip. I did just want to do a life update because this is my first vlog. This is the first time I really have to talk about what is going on in my life. I have not been filming. I simply have not had the time. So I am sorry and I have missed you, but I did just want to talk about what's going on in my life. First things first, I moved. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you knew this move was coming, but it did happen very, very quickly. Jake and I bought a house, and to be honest, we thought that like finding a house and buying it and like the whole process of that was going to take like 6 months to a year based off of what we've heard about just like the real estate market in the area that we're in. But it actually took less than a month. So it's been an absolute whirlwind of a journey. If this is your first video, also just know that last month I also had a surgery done. It was minor. I'm fully recovered from that, but like that was also something that was like taking up a ton of time in my life. First of all, moving into this house was a whirlwind of a process for us, and also this move has been kind of terrible. Now I want to clarify, I understand everything I'm about to tell you is like very much first world problems. I understand that even the ability to own a house makes me so privileged. I want to just say I am so happy that we were able to get this house. I feel extremely lucky. This is something that I did not think was going to happen for me ever. But if you've been wondering where I've been for weeks on end after I recovered from my surgery, the actual moving process has been hell. When we came and we visited the house, we obviously looked everywhere, and the woman that was selling us the house, she had a ton of stuff hung up on the walls, and we knew that she was a smoker. And when we had planned the moving process and like scheduled like moving truck, all of that stuff, we had planned beforehand that we were going to paint 3 rooms. And so we expected that to take 3 days, 1 day per room. And so we planned all of this into our schedule. What we didn't realize is once we actually got into the house and all of the stuff was taken off of the walls, all of the walls in the house were stained. And when I tell you that I scrubbed the walls to try to just clean them so that we wouldn't have to paint, I was scrubbing these walls with cleaner so hard that I actually got chemical burns on my fingers from just like being an idiot and exposing myself. As a result, we ended up painting every single room in the house. We technically still haven't painted the bathroom, but we will be painting that. It desperately needs it. The bathroom was actually one of the worst rooms in the house for staining, but there's like no furniture in there, so we're like, well, we can move in. We won't have to move furniture. That can wait. It still hasn't been painted. After we got the keys, the entire week leading up to the move, we were in this house doing like manual labor every single day for, I would say, at least 6 hours a day, sometimes up to like 10 hours depending on like what projects we were handling that day. And that also meant that like because we were spending so much more time here like fixing things, it also meant that like we had less time to pack for the actual move, and then that made the actual move like so much more chaotic than it should have been. The move should have been so simple. We moved from a small house to another small house. I don't remember what the square footage is, but like it's a small house. It was built in the 50s. So we don't have very much furniture. It should have been such a simple move, but because we just didn't have the time to prepare because we were fixing shit in this house. Oh, I also forgot to mention, I like terribly sprained my ankle. Honestly, I made it a lot worse than it needed to be because it was really swollen, and then I did not rest it properly because I was like, we just don't have the time. I was like, I can't sit on my butt and ice my ankle and like give it the proper rest that it needs because we have to get this stuff out of the old house. And then in the moving process, the movers broke our bed frame, so that was super annoying. My sister wanted to visit the house and see it. She actually found a used bed frame on Facebook Marketplace. She lives in Connecticut. I live in Ohio, if you were wondering. She found a used bed frame near her and she put it in her truck and drove it out here. She saved us so much money because we did not have to buy a brand new bed frame. It was so nice. It's like real solid wood. Like it is It's really nice. I'm so thankful. And like she got it off of Facebook for $100. And then the third problem was that, so our realtor that helped us with the whole process of moving was great, but he went on vacation and he got his like friend that works in the company that he's in to stand in, and she did not read the contract well enough. It was stated in the contract that we were getting all of the appliances, but then in addition to stating that we were getting all the appliances, there was an itemized list of those appliances, and for some reason she forgot to check that we were keeping the microwave. And so because of that, the lady that sold us the house took the microwave. That left us with like a giant section in the kitchen that was just like drywall, which was super annoying. It also left us without a microwave, which is like not the end of the world, but like in terms of like daily convenience, it is a big deal. Having a microwave isn't like essential. It's not like you need it to survive, but it was another added expense that we had to deal with. Now, one of the most annoying and petty things I'm about to tell you now, before we bought the house, before we closed, obviously we had an inspector come and inspect the house, and the inspector took a ton of pictures, and one of the pictures he took was the dishwasher, and it was closed, and the dishwasher was like flush underneath the kitchen counter. It was perfectly aligned with the kitchen cabinets, right? And then he opened it and he looked inside and there were dishes, and he took a picture of the open dishwasher, and this is included in the report. When we walked into the house after she left and we got the keys, the house is ours now. We went to open the dishwasher and the entire unit pulled out of the cabinets. Like, it was not secured at all. But what's actually wild, and I think like really weird and petty about this situation, is that the plug for the dishwashing unit is too big for like this space allotted for the dishwasher. When the dishwashing unit was plugged into the wall, the dishwashing unit could not slide back far enough in like the hole in the cabinets meant for it. So if you plugged in the dishwasher and then slid it into the hole that it's supposed to be secured in, it was not flush with the other cabinets. It was like sticking out a couple inches. And this is wild to me because, first of all, we're not gonna run a dishwasher when it's not secured. Like, what do you mean? It's gonna like be scooting across like the whole kitchen? No, of course not. But she had to have known that the plug was too big and that the dishwasher sat out several inches. Like, she had to know that. So she had to, for the inspection purposes, unplug the dishwasher and then slide the entire unit in and then load it up with enough dishes in the dishwasher so that the weight of the dishes prevented you from pulling the unit out when you opened the door. And so she had to have staged all of that because like there's no other way for it to have been flush with the cabinets and not move, unless she like went in and like detached everything after she moved because she just wanted to detach the dishwasher. Either way, it's weird. Either she staged it for the inspection or out of pettiness went in and detached the dishwasher. I genuinely don't know. So that was a multiple day project. Thankfully, my dad was able to come up and do that. And then because there's more, after we'd been living in the house for a week, the air conditioner broke. Here's the thing. We knew moving into the house, we knew when we purchased the house that we were gonna have to replace the air conditioning unit. It was over 20 years old, but we were really hoping that we could make it like a year or two before we were gonna have to replace it because that's really expensive. Basically, we have central air. If you do not live where I live, you might not know, but where I live in Ohio, it does get, every single year, it does get over 100 degrees in the summer. Thankfully, it's only been in the 80s so far this year, but by July and August, it will be in like the mid to high 90s or low 100s. So an air conditioning and central air is one of the things that like we were like, we're not buying a house if it doesn't have central air. And so it was just really, really bad, dumb luck that it broke a week after we moved in. But like the problem is that we couldn't get someone out to repair the air conditioner because our air conditioning unit was so old that it was actually like a Freon unit. And I don't know if you know, but Freon is really bad. They no longer make Freon units and they no longer sell Freon. Like you cannot repair Freon units unless you just happen to luck into some like private company that owns like the very exact specific parts that you need. Even though like the unit itself, like the whole thing wasn't broken, it ended up that we had to replace the entire air conditioning unit. It still is not running properly. We are in the process of getting it fixed. Like it is a multi-step thing because all the parts are on back order because we live in the United States and everything is a nightmare here. But we do not currently have a running air conditioner. So that is what we've been dealing with this move. It has been really rough. However, things are starting to stabilize out now. Also, yes, these are my new bookshelves. I actually can't believe this, but okay, so these bookshelves, in case you're wondering, definitely well outside of the budget. So okay, so these are the Billy bookshelves from IKEA. They are the ones that everybody has, and I do have extenders. Let me see if I don't know how well you can see. I genuinely don't know what you're looking at right now, but just know that these are floor to ceiling bookshelves. So I currently have 3 of the full-size Billies set up, and then I have 3 of the skinny Billies set up. If we look at the corner over here, which honestly, okay, I tried to put like my Lord of the Rings stuff over there and I kind of hate how it looks. I thought it was gonna be like a fun little like special edition moment, but I don't like it. I don't like it. I need to fix that situation. But anyways, because I have a window right there, so I have like the corner unit Billy, but on one side of the corner it's a narrow bookshelf, and then over on this side of the wall, like next to the door, there wasn't a space for another full one, so it's a skinny one. So it's skinny and then 3 full ones and then a skinny one in the corner and then a skinny one next to that between the corner and the window. And then if you can see behind the shelves, I got this contact paper. It's like peel and stick wallpaper off of Amazon. I want to make it clear, I did not come up with this idea by myself. This is something that I saw on Instagram, but I just love the idea, and I knew that I kind of wanted like cottage core witchy vibes for my new office because I actually own this room and I get to do whatever I want in it, and that's exciting. So I painted the walls green. It's like a light green. I'll probably show you in a clip. And then my parents bought me these bookshelves. They told me that it is a housewarming present, and this is like gotta be one of the most expensive gifts I've ever received in my life. Oh yeah, by the way, there's gonna be more bookshelves over in that corner. There's gonna be another like skinny by the window, skinny in the corner, and then a full other wide bookshelf, which is why if you look at my bookshelves, you might notice that like all my young adult books and middle grade and manga are missing because like they're gonna go over there. These bookshelves have been like the one bright happy spot within the move. I didn't think I was going to be able to afford these after the move for like a minimum of a year. I thought like maybe I'll be able to get like a couple of the bookshelves for Christmas and then like maybe a couple more my birthday, and then like eventually 2 years later I would have like all of them. But my parents bought me all of them. I literally sit in this room and I just stare at the bookshelves and I'm so happy. This is like the first time I have floor to ceiling bookshelves, and like also the Billy bookshelves are just like so sturdy compared to like the piece of crap, like the actual horrible crappy shit that I have from Amazon that I was using beforehand. If you look closely in like my older videos from the other house, like a lot of the shelves were warping, and like also I have so much room on these shelves. That is the goal. Like first of all, I want to make it clear I'm not gonna go crazy and just start buying books. I'm always buying like books here and there, but like the idea is that like I can grow into these shelves. I am so endlessly grateful and they make me so very, very happy. I'm not finished organizing them by a long shot. I basically mainly just was like, get the books on the shelves so that I don't have stacks of books on the floor and I don't have boxes of books everywhere. I still have yet to organize them. I still have more bookshelves to put together. and more things to set up. There you go. Those are all of my moving adventures. I desperately need some ice water now because it's so freaking hot. I will talk to you later, I guess. Okay, so this is what we're working on right now with the shelves. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. So they are obviously not finished. That's a box I need to unpack. Those are books that I am getting rid of. And yeah, so over here we have classics and nonfiction, and then next to it I have my historical and general fiction plus all my horror and thrillers. Then yeah, there's more down there. And then the rest of it is sci-fi fantasy. I do really like this shelf, which is just entirely fantasy romance. And then I also organized this a little bit. By the way, here is Dexter. He is asleep. This is currently the Robin Hobb shelf. I love how this looks. My thought process is, if you haven't figured it out, I organize my bookshelves by genre, and if you also haven't figured it out, the floor in my office is very creaky. These are the original hardwood floors, and they are the loudest floors I've ever experienced in my life. I was thinking that this, well, first of all, I have a bunch more mass market paperbacks too. I was thinking I'm just gonna like put them up there, just get them all dumped up at the top. But I was thinking like this first shelf, I'm gonna lean more towards like epic high fantasy, and then this shelf is going to be not epic high fantasy. So I mean, we'll see. It's a work in progress. Also, in case you are wondering, like this is the corner, and then I have this mirror. You can see my computer reflection. So this is the corner. So this is the window over here. There's still tape from painting. Oh, that's the shade of green that I chose for the walls. And then there's gonna be another corner over here. You can see like, I need to clean that stuff off of the floor. So this bookshelf is like put together, but there's gonna be another two of like the skinny billies here. But the problem is you see that vent. We need to like cut into the bottom of the bookshelf so that that vent is not blocked, and that's going to be like a lot of work. But this corner over here I think is going to be all of my manga, middle grade, and young adult. I think that should fit on two skinny and then a full-sized Billy. And then underneath the window I have a couple ideas. I'm not going to show you until I make my final decision. I have something that I want to do, but I'm not sure how it's going to look. So I have to wait to figure that out. But yeah, I think the color green I picked looks really, really nice with the contact paper in there. And like, I really thought my Lord of the Rings was going to have a moment there, but I kind of really hate how that looks. I do not like that shelf. Anyways, this is the update of what the current bookshelf setup is. I'm still going to be adjusting things. Hello, please excuse my appearance. I have been cleaning all day, but I did want to do a reading update because I finished my cleaning for the day and I want to be able to finish this book now that I'm done. But before I can really go sit down and finish this book, I just wanted to do an update real quick. I finished part 2 of this book, which is largely the games and like what is going on in the background of the games, because like obviously Snow himself is not a tribute. I don't actually have too much to say about this. To be perfectly honest, it's a lot more of Snow being mediocre and allowing other people to make him look good, and then also being manipulative. At times, there's a little bit of gaslighting going on. He's not a good guy. You definitely do get to see a little bit more of Snow's cleverness here, and like also how he uses his charisma to manipulate people around him, but also to like project this good guy image, which we know as the reader for a fact is a lie because we are inside his head and he's a terrible person. The cognitive dissonance, I said this when I was talking about part 1, the cognitive dissonance goes so hard. Snow justifies so much in his head that we as the reader can see through for his actions, and also like sometimes for his lack of actions. We the reader can tell is like him justifying, him trying to like make himself feel better after the fact. I think we all do want to be the heroes in our own story. None of us want to think of ourselves as evil. None of us wants to think of ourselves as a bad person, even though all of us at some point have done something bad. I mean, I would hope not to the extent of a fascist dictator, but I do think it's very interesting that we can see Snow justifying his actions, and that is like a very human thing to do, but at the same time we the reader can see the damage that is occurring directly because of his actions. And like there's a lot of times where like it's not really justifiable, and I mean like it's not like he's doing anything super evil at this point. He's like an 18-year-old kid in school. At this point he is not the mega super villain, but seeing how he justifies the actions that he takes in like part 2 and part 1, and seeing like the mental gymnastics he does, it definitely does lay the framework for how he could get worse, and then that leads to how he is in present day. I did also want to mention that I did like the philosophical discussions that Suzanne Collins put in here. Suzanne Collins has never exactly been subtle with her commentary within her books, but I really wasn't expecting to get so into philosophy in this. I am definitely not like an expert in philosophy by any means. My philosophy education consisted of one philosophy class in my undergrad and then watching The Good Place on repeat. But I talked earlier about Professor Gal, like Dr. Gal, and how she is like the head game maker and also a professor for Snow and his classmates, and how she sucks hard. Like she is not a good person, but she like repeatedly has the class running these like thought experiments about like social contract and like what we owe to each other. It does make me think of like The Good Place too. Like specifically I think there is like an episode called What We Owe to Each Other. Dr. Gal has them doing these thought experiments about social contract, and then also kind of tying those conversations into like the root of human nature. Like, are we born good? Are we born evil? Is it circumstances? And all of that. And I do think it is very interesting to watch in live time how Snow is having his opinions developed. You could definitely argue that he's being coached by Dr. Gal to feel a certain way, but like also at the same time, I think that it's more that Snow has already made up his mind and doesn't really want to admit it, and then is like looking for justification for the beliefs that he has already established in his own mind, so that he doesn't feel as bad for holding these beliefs. Now looking out in the world, and he's like, see, I told you people are bad. Look at what happened here. People are so bad. That's why we need the Capitol, so that we can control them. I expected all of the social commentary, but the philosophical discussions are a fun little addition that I didn't see coming, that I'm really enjoying. I'm done cleaning now and I want to go read my book. So that's what I'm gonna do. I have finished A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It's fantastic. I did warn you all at the beginning of this vlog that there would be mild spoilers potentially in here. I am still going to try to keep this spoiler free, but in order to talk about this book, I think that there are some things that I'm going to end up talking about that could be very mild spoilers. I don't think I'm going to talk about anything that is going to be a surprise, nothing that's really gonna be a reveal. If you've already read the original Hunger Games trilogy, I don't think anything I have to say is going to like shock you at all. I think it's like kind of pretty obvious once you start reading this book if you already know where we end up at the end of the series. And I also don't think knowing anything that I'm going to talk about would ruin your enjoyment of the book. That's your warning. Do with it what you will. I'm settling on a 4-star for this book. And I also wanted to mention that I think that this is a book that you could really reread and get like even more out of it on a reread. But I do still think that like the original Hunger Games is better. I mean, I don't know. I think like the final third of this book is probably, for me personally, the weakest part of it. Obviously, the final third of it has things to say and like is important thematically, but it was, in my opinion, kind of the weakest part of the story. I mentioned before in my other updates that this book has a lot to say philosophically. And I mean, to be honest, so does the original Hunger Games, but I think that this book specifically really leans into the philosophy over the social commentary. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's no social commentary in this book. If you've read the original series, then you know that it is a lot of social commentary with philosophy, morals, and ethical discussions built into that social commentary. This book is kind of like the reverse of that, where the primary focus seems to be that philosophy and ethics and morality, and then like the undercurrent is that social commentary. I love the philosophical discussions. Like I mentioned, it has a lot to do with what makes humanity humanity. Are people born good? Are they evil? Is it circumstances? Is it a combination of the two of them? And along the way we get to see it all through Snow's lens and how he eventually establishes his worldview that leads him to being a real sack of shit. I suppose this is like the mild spoiler that like I can't really talk about how this book wraps up without mentioning that Snow is convinced that he is in love with Lucy Gray Baird. It's really hard to get both sides of this relationship. First of all, this is not an equal relationship. Lucy Gray Baird is from a fringe community in the poorest district of Panem, and Snow is a Nepo baby from the capital who just happens to have fallen on some hard times. And not only that, there's an inherent power imbalance within this relationship because Snow is like directly responsible for keeping Lucy Gray Baird alive when she is reaped for the 10th annual Hunger Games. I think Suzanne Collins makes it so very, very clear that this is not a romance story. I think you can tell from page 1. Well, I mean, Lucy Gray Baird isn't in page 1, but like I think that you can tell from like when they very first meet through the whole book that like Suzanne Collins does not think that this is a romance. It is not intended to be a romance. Now, does Snow think that he is in love with Lucy Gray? I do think that he does. Is Lucy Gray in love with Snow? I mean, first of all, you could argue that like, can she be in love with him when he literally is holding her life in his hands? But beyond that, Lucy Gray is just like a very interesting character and she's very difficult to pin down. I think Suzanne Collins does a really good job of keeping her intentionally mysterious for the reader, and you really do have to read between the lines of Snow's perspective to really get a better idea of who she is. But beyond that, to be honest, she's like doesn't even take up that much page count for how important she is. Like, for how much Snow spends in his own head thinking about her, she's like not really even on the page as much as you would think she is. And it's also interesting because you can see Snow having these philosophical questions, these ethical questions placed before him by society and specifically like his teachers. And you can see him making the decisions and making up his mind about what he believes in. And Lucy Gray is there as like a direct opposition to his world beliefs. I mean, she's not the only one. I think that actually there are a lot more characters that take a stance opposite of Snow than there are characters reinforcing Snow's own belief. And yet he still is like so adamant that like people are garbage and they're naturally evil and like they're all just like animals waiting to commit violence. But I think what is actually going on in Snow's head is that he is elitist, he's privileged, he is narcissistic, and I think he also has a lot of fear that was developed in his childhood years. And I think all of those elements have combined that like he chose this worldview, he made up his mind about the way humanity is, and then is now cherry picking examples to prove his point, despite the plethora of examples that prove the direct opposite that he sees with his own eyes. I was questioning myself also in this book at times, wondering like, does Lucy Gray love Snow back? I think the conclusion I came to is that initially Lucy Gray does care for Snow. And I mentioned this when I was talking before. Snow is quite charismatic, and he's also constantly in his head trying to think about the best way to manipulate every single situation so that he comes out looking like a better person. When you look at everything that happened in part 1 and part 2, the Snow that Lucy Gray and also Sejanus, the Snow that they see is completely different than the Snow that we see in his head. I think Suzanne Collins did like such a fantastic job of painting this absolute shitty human of a narcissist who is at the end of the day an evil dude, but making it so that it's like extremely plausible that everyone else is fooled by him. When you're in his head, you know exactly why he's doing things, and you know that he is only looking out for himself. And as a matter of fact, the only reason that Snow is convinced that he loves Lucy Gray is because of how she makes him look. She saves him socially. She literally saves his life at one point. And like she also saves him academically, because remember like this mentor project was like a class, like a school project. So like she's saving him on so many levels, and he's like, wow, is this love? But when you look at parts 1 and 2 within this book and you see the actions that Snow takes, and we as the reader know why because we're in his head, but I think when you just look at the actions that he does, it makes sense why he is able to convince people that he is a good person. And when you literally look at the actions, it makes sense that Lucy Gray would think that their values align. But we, the reader, know that he's a narcissist, and we actually know that he is incapable of love. The only things that I think that motivate Snow in this entire book is fear and greed. I mean, it's one of the reasons too that like Snow won't even admit to himself in his own head that Lucy Gray is a like district person. In his head, he's like, district people suck, capital people are awesome, except for all of the people who are coming to the capital as new money. If you are a new money person, you also suck. Only the elite within the capital are the real good people. But in his head, he's also like, but the Covey, they're not really district. Which I mean is true, and it's one of the reasons that Lucy Gray is even like an outcast within District 12. The Covey are like their own community, and they are on the fringes of District 12 society. But like he looks at it and he's like, the Covey are just like their own people, and so like it's okay that I like her because she's not really from the districts. Like not really. Even though if he spent like 5 minutes actually listening to what she has to say, he would know that like obviously her values are going to align with the district value. Like, what do you mean? But like a true narcissist, I don't think he is capable of love. Lucy Gray is just the newest addition in a long string of people that Snow only cares about because of how they can help him and his affection for people. I mean, I do think that like he cares, but like I don't think it's love. He does not value people or care about people for their own sake. He only has care and affection for people based off of what they do for him. You can even see it with like Tigress, his cousin. I want Tigress's story now. That's the one that I care about. Also, I want a story from the point of view of a career. No, here's the thing. This is a tangent. This is like a tangent. It's gonna make this video way too long. I don't care. In the original Hunger Games series, we are introduced to quite a few careers. I think specifically Cato would be a very interesting character to get his book from. I just think it would be so interesting to see a book from the point of view of a character actively deprogramming themselves from being brainwashed. I don't think Cato actually fully buys into being a career. I think he probably initially did, but I think once he's actually in the games, he quickly learns his place, and I think that he deprograms himself, at least in part, from the capital brainwashing that makes the Hunger Games seem like a privilege. I only have a couple pieces of evidence to back up this theory that I have, but first of all, there are 2 times in the Hunger Games, twice, and Cato is only on a handful of pages, so it's significant that this happens twice, where Cato injures another competitor within the Hunger Games and they don't die. 2 times this boy that has been training his entire life to be in the Hunger Games and is supposed to be a killing machine fed on capital propaganda doing his civic national duty, 2 times we see him injure a player and that player does not die. And I think that that is significant because he is meant to be a killing machine. He should be killing them, not injuring them. Like Peeta at one point goes back to finish off Cato's kill. It's that fact, and then also the fact that like at the end, the conversation with like Katniss and with the mutts at the cornucopia, like that. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, but I do just want to remind Cato haters that he was a child that was manipulated and brainwashed. Does that make him a good person? No, but I just want to remind people that he was a manipulated child. Okay, anyways, back to this book. What was I even talking about? Oh yeah, basically that Snow's affection for other people is entirely contingent on what they are doing for him actively at the moment. And I think that it is very intentional that as soon as the game portion of this book is done, that we are able to see the cracks immediately in this romance between Snow and Lucy Gray. Immediately, Lucy Gray has moments where she's like, wait, what? And Snow registers that Lucy Gray disagrees with him. This is also something that I think makes Lucy Gray such a fascinating character, on top of the fact that she's just so mysterious because we only get glimpses of her through Snow's eyes and we have to like almost investigate who she is as a person. I think that because Lucy Gray is on the fringes of society in this group that does not really fully meld in, I think that Lucy Gray has probably developed a really great sense of perception of people. I think she's probably great at reading body language and facial cues from other people, and she's great at like listening and analyzing what they say, because I think that probably a lot of the Covey are because it keeps them safe. It lets them know who they can trust. And Lucy Gray even tells Snow that like before love, the most important thing for her is, can she trust a person? And immediately with the relationship between the 2 of them, we are seeing cracks and we are seeing flaws and we are seeing that this is probably not gonna be the romance of the century. I also think it's like very intentional that we, the reader, can see how much Snow is motivated by fear in this book, in addition to seeing how Snow justifies this mindset that he develops about what makes a human a human. We also get to see some of his earliest betrayals. Snow very clearly justifies them in his own mind. And I'm talking like, I'm not saying like just in part 3, I'm saying like betrayals throughout the entire book. But he's so good at like justifying his own actions in his own head. But then you realize that it's just fear talking. It, like I said, it's fear and greed. Again, I just want to emphasize that I also really, really like the philosophical discussions that are in here. I think they're super important. I love how like Lucy Gray is portrayed as like basically the philosophical opposite of Snow. Thematically, this book is 10 out of 10. Obviously, the events of this book set him up to be the bitter old man he is, and like it makes sense why he hates Katniss so much. There's like a lot of Easter eggs in here where you're like, oh shit, this is like really personal for him. This man held a grudge for 60 years. Like it's so personal for him. And honestly, like from that point of view, like how long he held on to these grudges and how petty he is actually kind of hilarious. I think it's really funny. Suzanne Collins is also like a phenomenal author. Like I love her writing. Her writing is just so compelling. It is compulsively readable. You do not want to put these books down. Her writing just gets you so immersed immediately, and it's like one of those books where you just like forget that you're reading a book, which is a fantastic feeling. To sum it up, love this book. Gave it 4 stars. Snow is a fantastic character study. I would argue Lucy Gray is also a fantastic character study, in just like the idea that we're not in her perspective, so everything we think about her is not confirmed. It's a little mysterious, it's a little vague, and I absolutely love the philosophical discussions here. So that is A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I did a couple days ago order Sunrise on the Reaping. It's out. It should be here later today. So if everything goes according to plan, I would like to, like as soon as that book gets here, I would like to literally start reading it immediately. So I might actually be able to update you guys on part 1 of Sunrise on the Reaping later today. Hi, I am fresh from the shower. I need to put on lip balm. Just remembered, today's plans are reading and finishing Sunrise on the Reaping. As you can tell, I literally just showered. I should be looking real moisturized right now. I am basically a swamp toad right now, but I think it's gonna be a good day. I'm gonna read, but I wanted to do an update before I get going because I did finish part 1 and I wanted to give you all my thoughts on that. So far, it is an absolutely wild ride. As you would expect, a lot of the themes and the commentary in here is commentary that is also present in the original Hunger Games trilogy, but it does seem that this time Suzanne Collins is specifically focusing on the idea of propaganda. That is something that was present and like sort of discussed within the original trilogy, but I don't think to the extent that we're gonna get into it in this book, mainly because like it is very obvious. It is in your face. Suzanne Collins says this is what propaganda is. Sit down and listen the fuck up. I think the commentary in here feels a lot more in your face than both the original Hunger Games and also A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I do think that is intentional, first of all, because I think that everything Suzanne Collins does is intentional, but I also think that her being so very obvious in the way she is talking in this book about propaganda serves the purpose, because it's like, it's a book about propaganda, so like she wants to be in your face and obvious. Like she doesn't want to beat around the bush. That makes sense playing into the themes of the story. If you've read the original trilogy, you already know things about characters that are going to appear in this book. And there are a lot of characters from the original trilogy that are showing up in here. And it also does kind of like play with your head a little bit, because obviously like the characters that we meet in part 1 of this book are very, very different than the characters that we see when we meet them in the Hunger Games. Even when it comes down to the Reaping, which, I mean, that hello, like all of the Reaping chapters, devastating. I hate it here. I hate it. I mean, I love the book, but I hate it. But Plutarch is in this, he's at the Reaping, and he is like a cameraman, and we know that like he is gonna move up in the world by the time we get to like the original Hunger Games trilogy, and we know that like he uses his camera skills to make a lot of propaganda. It makes sense knowing what he does in the original trilogy to have him here. In this book, in part 1, Plutarch is a cameraman. He's not a cameraman actually, like he's like a director, and one of his jobs is to go to the districts during the Reapings, and he's filming it, and he's trying to get reactions from the District 12 people, I'm assuming the other districts as well, but he wants this to be good entertainment for the capital because that is his job, and we are not in his head, so like we, to be perfectly honest, don't know where he is in his character arc and his character journey. And it's really interesting because it does kind of play with your head a little bit, because we see that he needs to get this footage of District 12. And the thing is we know enough about Snow at this point to know that like if Plutarch fails his job, like he might just be murdered. We know that Plutarch has a really high stakes job, and he is trying to do his job. He's trying to get these like tearful reactions from the members of District 12. So he kind of like strikes up this deal, and he basically tells Haymitch's family, if you give me the reaction footage I need, I can make sure that you get to say goodbye to your son, to your brother, because yeah, Haymitch has a little brother. Because of what happened at the Reaping, which like I won't tell you because I do think it's a spoiler, but because of what happened at the Reaping, the escort that's in charge of taking them to the capital says that, hey, you don't get any goodbye time with your families. So that's why like Plutarch is making this deal. Haymitch tells his family like, no, don't accept the deal, don't give him the footage he needs. But his mom's like, no, we're going to, because it's more important for us to be able to say goodbye to you. This scene is really interesting from a reader's perspective, knowing where Plutarch is going to end up, because on one hand, he is going out of his way to get Haymitch goodbye time with his family, but on the other hand, he is also manipulating the situation so he can get footage for the capital. Also, Mags and Wiress are in here. If you've read the Hunger Games trilogy, you know that Haymitch is going to be the victor. As a matter of fact, Peeta and Katniss actually watch the footage of Haymitch's game in Catching Fire as like a way for them to prepare for the Second Court of Quell. And we do know some things that are going to happen. Like we know some of the events. We know that like, for example, he ends up teaming up with Maisley, whom, oh my god, I love Maisley. Like I'm absolutely obsessed with her. We'll get to that. But now that I've seen what happened on Reaping Day in District 12, with how obvious Suzanne Collins is about the theme of propaganda within this book, I'm really starting to wonder like, what really did happen? And also District 12 currently doesn't have a victor, so they basically have to draft victors from other districts, and it's Wiress and Mags, who we know from Catching Fire. They are very, very different here. Also, one thing that I think is really, really funny, in Hunger Games, the original trilogy, they have that like chariot where all the tributes are in a chariot and they're like pulled to the center square, blah, blah, blah. That happens in here too. They have like the whole chariot procession so that like the capital citizens can like cheer on the tributes. Absolutely wild. This is the second time where I'm like, holy shit, Haymitch. When I originally read Catching Fire and we find out what happens in Haymitch's game and Haymitch talks about like how he was punished, I kind of was like, that seems like an overreaction. Yes, we know Snow is gonna punish him for that, but I'm like, that's all he did and he got that much punishment? But now that I see what Haymitch did during the opening ceremonies, I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe it makes more sense that Snow seemed to have a personal vendetta. The Cherry Parade, it is very, very intense. A lot of things happen. And I will just say, without spoiling anything, that Haymitch does some things that are gonna make his life more difficult and also personally piss off President Snow. The thing that I said that was really funny to me is that, like, President Snow, he's just so petty, and this man has still not gotten over Lucy Gray. She lives in his head every single day of his life. And I know this because the horses that are assigned to District 12 to pull their chariot are like beaten down old horses on like the last leg of their life. And I'm just like, at first I was like, wait, why would they give them like horses that look terrible and are about to die? Because doesn't that make like the Capitol kind of look bad? Like the Capitol is cheap, they can't even give the tributes good horses. But then I remembered that this opening ceremony is one of the first times that some of the Capitol people see the tributes. Like obviously they saw them at the reaping, but now they're like in the Capitol, they've been prepped by their stylists and all of that. So this is one of the first times that they're gonna see them as like actual tributes, and this is like part of how some of these tributes are gonna get sponsors. And Snow is so fucking hung up on Lucy Gray that he's just like, I can't let any more District 12 victors happen. I cannot have any sponsors for these kids, so let's give them shitty horses so they look like poor pieces of trash. That is just so funny to me that he is still so caught up over this girl from 40 years ago. Just a few more thoughts. I love Maisley. I love her so much. I do love Luella also, but like there's just something so satisfying about Maisley being a mean girl. She is so fierce and iconic. It just works so well. I'm obsessed with her. Everything she does has me cheering for her, and I know she's gonna die because we know Haymitch is the victor, and that breaks my heart a little bit already. I love that Suzanne Collins made her a mean girl. Suzanne Collins does subvert like a lot of tropes that you see in YA. So often the mean girl is the villain in stories, and I just love that in this one she's not. She is a complex person, and yeah, like she is mean, but it's just really fun to see that despite the fact that she is mean, that like she still is a person deserving of rights. She has value in and of herself, and like the fact that she is mean does not make her evil. I'm absolutely obsessed with her. I'm just excited to see her and Haymitch develop more of a relationship. We know that like they have to at least be friendly because they do end up temporarily teaming up in the arena, so like they can't hate each other because you can't team up in the arena with someone you hate, because you have to be able to trust that they won't murder you in your sleep. The last thing that I want to talk about is just how absolutely devastating it is to see the similarities between Katniss and Haymitch. I think seeing how similar they are, and then also knowing how Haymitch's story ends, it just makes it more devastating. The process of reading it is just so upsetting. I'm so sad and I hate it here. Katniss was a bit rebellious, and Haymitch is also rebellious in his own way. He's a bootlegger, and that is also illegal. So I think that it's just really fun to see the similarities, and by fun I do mean horribly, horribly heartbreaking. It's also heartbreaking because Haymitch has a girlfriend who he considers to be like the love of his life, Lenore Dove. And it's also interesting because Lenore Dove is Covey. There are already differences that we can see within the Covey society between Ballad and then Sunrise. We don't see like the actual like ins and outs of the Covey society in this as much as we do in Ballad, because Lenore Dove is like not really on page very often, so it's really just in Haymitch's head and in like his memories that we get to see the changes in the Covey that have happened in the last 40 years. While we're on the topic, we finally learn more about Katniss's parents and Katniss's father. First of all, Katniss's father is Haymitch's best friend. Are you kidding me? Katniss's father is Haymitch's best friend. Haymitch has to deal with all of the repercussions of what happens after he wins the Hunger Games and Snow's punishment, but then he also has to see his best friend die in a coal mining accident, and then he has to mentor his best friend's daughter in the Hunger Games? Suzanne Collins, you are not a nice lady. But then we also find out that Katniss's father is cousins to Lenore Dove, who is part of the Covey. We know that Katniss at least has Covey blood in her. Now here's the thing, Lenore Dove, she is part of the Covey community, but like obviously the Covey have been living in District 12 for years and years and years now, for multiple generations, so I'm sure there have been like plenty of like intermarrying type of deals and plenty of children born. So Katniss's father is not part of the Covey, he is just related to the Covey. I don't think Katniss would be considered actual Covey, but like that is a fun fact, knowing that Katniss is who takes President Snow down, and then knowing what happens in Ballad with President Snow and the Covey and how much he like freaking hates them. The Haymitch in the original Hunger Games trilogy is a very complex, very traumatized man. He does some things within the original Hunger Games that, because we're in Katniss's head, we see as like a bad and negative thing. Like within the original trilogy, he intentionally withholds information from Katniss and coaches her actions to get like the end result that we need for the rebellion. Within the original Hunger Games, we the reader can see like why that is necessary, but because we're in Katniss's head, we also see how hurt she is by him both manipulating her and withholding information from her, and so we're like, Haymitch, that was a bad thing you did. But now that we see how impulsive and like a little bit reckless and rebellious Haymitch is in this, the rebelliousness in Haymitch in this book really reminds me of the way Katniss is. Haymitch didn't have anyone to tell him, if you do this, you're gonna be severely punished by Snow. He didn't have anyone there to shield him from the consequences of his own actions. And I mean, you can see that he's doing these actions because he's fully convinced that he is going to die in the arena. He doesn't think there's any way that he can win. So he's like, well, I don't have to worry about the consequences of my actions because I'm going to be dead. But knowing how the consequences of his actions have shaped him as a person in the original Hunger Games, we can kind of see why he withheld information from Katniss, why he manipulated her into acting a certain way and to doing a certain things. Even though manipulating a person is a bad thing to do, he was in his own way, I think, trying to shield her from how terrible the consequences can actually get. He was really manipulating her to try and curb her most extreme and impulsive, rebellious tendencies so that she didn't suffer the same consequences he did. The point is, part 1 is devastating. The parade, devastating. The reaping, devastating. Seeing how happy and in love Haymitch is, I want to stab myself. So that's where I'm at. I'm gonna go make a coffee and a bagel, I think, and I'm gonna spend the rest of the day reading. I will probably check in when I finish part 2. Remember when I said that I was going to update you when I finished part 2? Well, I'm a dirty liar because I finished the entire book. I mean, I'm not really even that sorry about it. I just simply could not put this book down. First things first, yes, I am giving it a 5-star rating. I do think that I still prefer the original trilogy to this book. I just think that the original trilogy could really get more into nuance and depth because it was a trilogy. It had 3 books. More pages means that we have more things that we can talk about, and we can talk about them in more depth. That being said though, I did still really love this. I did give it 5 stars. Did it make me cry? Twice. Twice. Okay, so first of all, the epilogue made me cry. Haymitch talks about why he called Katniss sweetheart, and even though that should have been so very, very obvious to me, I apparently am an idiot and didn't put it together until Haymitch told me in his own words, and so that made me cry. And then in the arena, when Mags sends Haymitch ice cream as a sponsor gift, that part made me cry. This book is just devastation after devastation. It is just so mean. I don't really have that much to say plot-wise. We already knew that Haymitch was going to win the games going into the book. In the interest of not spoiling, I'm not really gonna talk about what actually happens in the games, but it just sucks all around. And I just think it's absolutely fantastic, all of the messaging that Suzanne Collins did about propaganda, and then we ourselves still fell to the propaganda. Like, we still fell for it. When you read the original trilogy, Katniss and Peeta watch Haymitch's game. I've mentioned this already. When you actually see what happens in Haymitch's game, it is completely different. But just the way the Capitol is able to spin everything, and the fact that when like they're in the arena, there are so many cameras going on at so many points that it's like, even though we see what Haymitch is doing and we understand the significance of what he's doing, the newcomer alliance and all of that, which is I think fantastic because there's so many different cameras and there's so much footage, the Capitol is still able to only show what they want seen. We read Katniss watching Haymitch's Hunger Games and we're like, yeah, Katniss is a reliable narrator, so that must be what happened. It's so funny. It's so funny because literally, of course, that isn't what happened. Even in the first book in the Hunger Games, Katniss talks about how some of the things she's doing could be considered rebellious, and how she knows that like while she's doing these actions, the Capitol is probably not putting her on the TV, even though what she's doing is interesting, because it would be considered rebellious. So she's like, they're not showing me on camera right now. And it's like, Katniss knows this. We, the reader, know that the Capitol has control over what everybody in Panem sees during the Hunger Games and after the Hunger Games. We already know this, and yet we still fell for the propaganda of Haymitch's games. I did mention that a lot of the commentary in here is like very, very in your face, and I think that that remains throughout the whole book. Part of me thinks that it is Suzanne Collins being like, okay, listen, you guys didn't pay attention in the first trilogy, so I'm gonna spell it out even more. I do think that that is part of it. She's like, everybody, I have to repeat myself, so sit down and listen this time. But I also do think that, again, like I mentioned before, part of her being so obvious is because she is talking about the topic of propaganda. Thematically, when talking about this and like the effects that it has on people, it does make sense to be so obvious about it. I do think that like some of the messaging that was like maybe about some of the other topics could have been a little bit more subtle, but also at the same time, you know, Suzanne Collins, I kind of feel like she might have been a little angry writing this. Then this book also talks a lot about resistance in any country. It's like the few ruling over the many, the balance required for the government to be able to exert control over the population. And then we get into a lot of like resistance and what does that look like, and to be perfectly honest, some really blatant conversations about submission. I think Plutarch says like implicit submission, just by the fact of not standing up and not resisting, then you are inherently submitting to this, even if you disagree with the government rule. I did like the conversations in here about how the government rules its people and how we allow that to happen and what types of resistance we can perform. Perform is not the right word there, but I can't think of what the right word is. There are different ways that we can resist, that we can stand up and take action. And I also think that like they were really appropriate for this book, because one thing that like I loved about this, and probably the reason other than me crying that it got 5 stars, is that at first when we were getting all of these characters in here that we know from the original Hunger Games series, the victors, like BT's in here, Effie's in here, Mags, Wyrus, Plutarch, like all of these characters, at first I thought that it was like a little bit fan servicey, but then by the time you reach the end and you see all of the different ways that not only Haymitch resists, but the ways that the mentors resist, the ways that all of the other tributes in the arena resist. There are so many acts of resistance within this book, and I think it is really important that Suzanne Collins showed us those acts of resistance, but I also think that it's important that we see all of these characters 25 years before the original Hunger Games trilogy, and we see that they're already in the process of resisting. They are already in the process of rebellion, and some of them have already been punished for their acts of resistance and rebellion. I think it's important to acknowledge that, first of all, like the rebellion didn't just happen. We know that like Katniss is the catalyst for the final revolution, the one that is successful, but in this we see that really it's been a work in progress for years and years. Haymitch and the other tributes in here and the victors and the mentors that are resisting, this is not the beginning of it. Like things are already underway, and I think it is important for a couple reasons. First, in that it shows that this is something that's been going on for years and years and years. And I think it shows that true resistance and true rebellion takes community, it takes people, it takes working together. And I think that that is important. But I also think it's important because when you read this book, you see all of the acts of resistance that these people do, and those acts are important. Was Haymitch the Mockingjay? No, it doesn't negate that his resistance was still important. Personally, myself, sometimes I feel so hopeless. It feels like there is nothing I can really do aside from donating monetarily and going to protests. And I'm not negating the effects of protests. I'm not trying to say that they're not important, but it does feel like I'm not really making change. It does feel like I don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I think seeing Haymitch and all of the other small acts of resistance in here and seeing them just simply do what they can with the resources and the time and the allies that they're able to come up with, and just seeing them simply not submit, seeing them stand up and resist, I think it is important, even though we know that like this could be considered a failure. You could consider all of Haymitch's actions to be a failure because he wasn't the Mockingjay. Katniss ended up being the Mockingjay. Did he stop the Hunger Games? No. Did he significantly change things? No. But that doesn't take away from the fact that his resistance was a radical act in and of itself. It doesn't take away from the fact that his resistance did have impact. And even though initially I thought that maybe some of these characters were just here for fan service, it turns out no, they're here to show that this is a group effort. This is a community. This is an entire group of people collectively joining forces to affect change. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to say. I know as soon as I end this vlog, I'm gonna come up with like a million more things to say. I loved it. I loved Haymitch's story. Honestly, I don't know how I'm gonna recover from this book because there's just so many bad things that happened. And yeah, Maisley will remain iconic forever. So yeah, that's Sunrise on the Reaping. I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life now. I don't think that Suzanne Collins really needs me to say on the internet that I recommend the series, but there you go, I do. Go reread the original trilogy. Go read Ballad. Go read Sunrise. They're all so excellent. Thank you for being here with me today, and sitting through all of my yapping. I can tell, but this is definitely going to be one of the longest vlogs I've ever done, so I hope you enjoyed it. But if you like this video, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate that. I hope that you stay safe this week. I hope you stay cool, because I certainly am not going to. It's 90 degrees and everything is terrible. I'll see you in another video soon. Goodbye.